On September 29th, 1982, 27-year-old Adam Janis stayed home from work that day because he woke up feeling sick. At around noon that day, he went to go pick up his 2 children from preschool, and on his way home, he ran into a pharmacy to grab some Tylenol. When Adam returned home with his 2 kids, his wife had lunch ready, so they all ate as a family before Adam took 2 Tylenol and went to take a nap. Moments later, he came back into the kitchen where his wife and children were when he collapsed. His wife immediately picked up the phone and called 911, and Adam was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Adam's entire family came to the hospital to say their goodbyes, asking doctors how could this possibly happen, but they didn't know. Only an autopsy would tell us. After saying their goodbyes, Adam's entire family left the hospital and went back to Adam's house with his wife and 2 kids. And not long after arriving, Adam's little brother, 25-year-old Stanley, got a really bad headache. So Stanley told his wife, 19-year-old Teresa, and Teresa went and asked Adam's wife if she had any medication in the house that could help. She then directed the young couple to her kitchen where they could find a bottle of Tylenol, and they each took 2. After taking the capsules, they walked out of the kitchen, drinking their water from their glasses, and then they collapsed. Adam's wife immediately called 911 for the 2nd time today, and first responders were shocked because the young couple was exhibiting the same exact symptoms as Adam did just hours before. They were then rushed to the same hospital as Adam, where they were both pronounced dead. ER doctors and nurses were stunned, and they were panicking, fearing that there was some sort of toxin in Adam's home that was killing everybody there. They began asking detailed questions to the family members while public health officials and authorities went back to Adam's home to search. But the only thing that they could find in the home was a newly opened bottle of Tylenol with 6 capsules missing. They brought that same bottle of Tylenol back to the hospital for testing, and when the medical examiner opened it, the first thing he smelled was almonds. Cyanide. Toxicology reports were immediately ran on all 3 victims and the remaining Tylenol capsules, revealing that the Tylenol capsules remaining contained 100 times the amount of cyanide needed to kill a human. Word of this trickled around Chicago just as 2 first responders happened to be on the phone, which is when they realized that there were more victims. Part 2 is on the playlist below. Part 2 of the Chicago Tylenol murders. While talking on the phone, Richard Keyworth and Philip Campanelli, 2 first responders, realized that there were more victims to the laced Tylenol. At 6:30 a.m. that same morning, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up for school feeling sick. Her parents told her that she could stay home from school and gave her 2 Tylenol. Mary took the 2 capsules and then went to the restroom. After shutting the door, her father heard a loud sound. He called out to his daughter, but there was no response. He rushed to the bathroom when he opened the door to find 12-year-old Mary on the ground unconscious. Paramedics did everything they could to just try to get Mary to take a breath, while asking her parents if there was anything that she did out of the ordinary that morning. At which point, Mary's parents handed paramedics a bottle of Tylenol. Mary was then rushed to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. Richard Keyworth, who had responded to Mary's call, immediately hung up the phone on Philip and called the police department. Luckily, they were able to track down that bottle of Tylenol that was given to paramedics, and it was tested, and it contained cyanide. For those who don't know, cyanide is a chemical asphyxiant that stops your red blood cells from utilizing oxygen. So no matter how much pure oxygen is being pushed into your lungs, the cyanide blocks it. And it works quickly, sending you into cardiac arrest, causing severe brain damage, literally just minutes after entering your system. A task force was quickly assembled between the police department, medical examiner's office, and local hospitals as they called around searching for any other cases that could possibly be related. And unfortunately, they discovered 2 more victims. On that same afternoon, 27-year-old Mary Rainier was at home recovering after the birth of her 4th child. She felt a migraine coming on, so she took 2 Tylenol out of the L&D care package that was given to her at the hospital and drank a glass of water. Moments later, she collapsed. Her husband, Ed, called 911 and she was pronounced dead. Later that same evening, 31-year-old Mary McFarland was at work when she got a headache, as she always did, and went to go take 2 Tylenol. When she got back to her coworker, they were talking when all of a sudden Mary collapsed. And unfortunately, she passed away upon arrival at the hospital. Upon learning this, toxicology reports were ran on the victims, confirming that they had taken laced Tylenol. Hospitals in the city and suburbs of Chicago were on high alert, throwing out all of the Tylenol that they had, which is when the media got a hold of this story. Part 3 is in the playlist below. Final part of the Chicago Tylenol murders. By 9 a.m. on September 30th, 1982, an attorney from Johnson & Johnson arrived at the medical examiner's office in Chicago to see proof of the toxicology reports. And by 10 a.m. that morning, a press conference was held to warn the people of Chicago and the surrounding areas of the laced Tylenol. First responders, volunteers, and Boy Scouts went door to door in the cities searching for bottles of Tylenol to collect and send off for testing. At this point in time, the victim count was 6, and officials did everything in their power to stop that number from rising. But unfortunately, it was too late. At 5 p.m. that day, officers responded to a welfare check at the home of 35-year-old Paula Prince, which is when they found Paula dead in her apartment, just 2 steps away from a newly opened bottle of Tylenol. Paula and that bottle of Tylenol was tested, confirming that it was cyanide, raising the number to now 7 victims. Upon this discovery, all bottles of Tylenol were ordered off of the shelves of Chicago. And on October 5th, 1982, Johnson & Johnson ordered a nationwide recall on all Tylenol products. That was 31 million bottles of Tylenol that at the time were worth over $100 million, with Johnson & Johnson sending out a nationwide warning using news outlets. Everyone was stunned, as this was Tylenol, the #1 over-the-counter pain reliever at the time. According to the Washington Post, in 1982 alone, Tylenol brought Johnson & Johnson $400 million in sales, claiming 35% of the over-the-counter pain reliever market share. That overnight dropped to just 8%. The next day, on October 6, exactly a week after the murders began, Johnson & Johnson's headquarters received a letter. But this wasn't just any letter. It was an extortion letter, demanding $1 million to stop the Tylenol killings. The FBI was actually able to trace this letter back to a convicted criminal named James Lewis. However, they could not connect him to this crime. And to this day, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain unsolved. What are your thoughts on this case?
Today's case is the murder of Tara Grant. Tara Grant was born and raised in a small town in Michigan. She went to college and got her bachelor's in business. Shortly after this, she began working for a firm that dealt with engineering, construction, and they were federal contractors. And she worked her way up the corporate ladder. She became extremely successful. So much so that as her career went on, she would be in Puerto Rico for work 5 days a week and come home on the weekends. She was married and had 2 children. His name is Steven. He had previously wanted to be in politics, but that didn't really pan out. So essentially he was the Mr. Mom, but he was said to sometimes work part-time at his dad's shop. The main responsibility was their kids, getting them to their games and all of that. They did have a live-in nanny though. She was 19 years old and from Germany. And like most of these cases, they just looked like the perfect couple, right? But no, really they had a power struggle going on because Steven had a huge issue that Tara was the breadwinner. And he was also convinced that she was sleeping with her boss or having another type of affair, which none of that was true. But Steven here was not only having an affair with the nanny, but was also having an online affair with an ex-girlfriend via email. Flash forward to Valentine's Day 2007. Steven calls to report his wife missing. He had actually said she had been missing since February 9th, which was the previous Friday. His story was that Tara had came home from work like she always did on Fridays and said that she had to turn around and go back on Sunday versus Monday, which he admitted that this led to a fight. fight. And after said fight, she called someone on their landline and said, "I'll be right out," and left in a dark vehicle. He left numerous voicemails on her phone saying she needed to come home, needed to answer, needed to see the kids. He also contacted her parents, who said, "Give her some space, just let her go to work, talk to her in a few days." So he said that's why he waited until Valentine's Day to call the police to report her missing. This set off bullshit meters for authorities right away, so they handed it over to detectives to check it out. Stephen here did a lot of interviews with the media. He's ranges from crying to later talking shit, saying he was a better mom than her. And police started looking into this more and more, and they checked into her passport, and guess what? It hadn't left the US. Also, her bank cards hadn't been used either. Shortly after this, Stephen began to be not cooperative with the police and said he would not do a polygraph test for them when they requested it, said he would do his own with an independent person, which came back inconclusive. But we know those are kind of just whatever. But flash forward just a couple weeks and stuff would start to happen in March. Okay, we're in part 2 of the murder of Tara Grant. There was a lady who was on a hike at Story Creek National Park, and she found a plastic bag inside of a tree. Inside this bag were metal shavings, gloves, and blood, which later would be matched to Tara's DNA. Because of this finding, police started to do a deeper search into the park to see what else they could find. Also going on at the same time, they had a search warrant for the Grant home. Authorities say Stephen was cooperative at this time, but he did ask to go walk his dog. They couldn't hold him, so they said sure. He ended up leaving and going to a friend's house and getting a truck from them, which that poor dude had no idea why he wanted a truck, but was just like, okay, sure, you can borrow my car, don't care. Well, while all that's happening, the search warrant continues, and they find this tote. This plastic tote had plastic inside, so the detective poked at it and said it didn't feel just like plastic. When they went inside the tote more, they discovered the torso of Tara from the neck to her thighs, still in the work clothes she had been in that Friday. Of course, now they're looking for Stephen, and they couldn't find him for 2 days. They ended up tracking his cell phone, and they would find him at Michigan's Wilderness State Park. He had intended on taking his own life. He had taken liquor and pills from his sister's house, and he had nothing to protect him from the cold weather. So when they found him, he was actually still alive, and they airlifted him to the hospital to be treated for hypothermia. Once he was able to talk to police, he just told them exactly what happened. So he did talk about how they did get into the fight at the home, and he strangled his wife to death. Afterwards, he knew he had to get rid of her body, so he took it to his dad's shop and dismembered her. Then he put her remains in the tote and took it to the park where the plastic bag was found. But after he found out that the police were going to search the park, he took her torso and put it in the plastic, and that's how it ended up in the garage. Also, when hiding her body at the park, he had taken one of his children's sleds to help him move it, and it had rolled down the hill, so he had to chase her body. He would be found guilty on second-degree murder and given a minimum of a 50-year sentence. Of course, he tried to appeal it, but it would just be left alone, and he would stay with his 50 to 80-year prison sentence. Her children have been raised by her sister. They are adults now, and the whole family does a memorial walk/5K type of thing for her in her honor, and it's amazing. Look it up.